Now on BBC Scotland, we make our way to Rutherglen Town Hall, where Stephen Jardine and his panel of guests are waiting to answer your questions as we kick off a new series of Debate Night.
Well, summer is over and we're back, starting a new series in Rutherglen. The next year is set to see huge political events, and the first big test of them will be the by-election here. So what do the people of Rutherglen think? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. It's good to be back. Tonight, 3 party leaders, a party chairman and a Westminster leader are here to answer the big questions of the day. On our panel this evening, from the SNP, Westminster leader Stephen Flynn. Stephen is also the MP for Aberdeen South and was named the best Scot at Westminster at the recent Holyrood Political Awards. Leader of the Scottish Labour Party and MSP for Glasgow, Anas Sarwar. Previously, Anas was an MP for Glasgow Central. According to Andrew Marr, he is one of the most talented of the younger generation of Labour politicians in the UK. Co-leader of the Scottish Greens and MSP for Lothian, Lorna Slater. Lorna is Minister for Green Skills, Circular Economy and Biodiversity. Originally from Canada, Lorna moved to Scotland almost 20 years ago and before politics worked as an engineer. Leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Alex Cole-Hamilton. Alex is also the MSP for Edinburgh Western, elected again in 2021, with the highest number of votes ever cast for an MSP, despite his party having their worst result at the same time. And finally, from the Scottish Conservative Party, Craig Hoy. Craig is the chairman of the party and MSP for South Scotland. Formerly a journalist, Craig was the founding editor of Holyrood magazine. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And of course, welcome to our studio audience. It's great to be with you here tonight in Rutherglen. And you can join in the discussion from home. BBC DN is the hashtag you need on social media. And our Debate Night podcast will also be available for you to download straight after this broadcast. We've got a lot to catch up on and get through tonight, so let's get started. Our first question comes from Matt Laird. Matt, good evening.
Good evening, panel. Are we sleepwalking into an apocalypse on climate change, as stated by the TV presenter Chris Packham, especially with the Prime Minister U-turning and reneging on all his climate zero targets?
Thank you, Matt. Big announcement in the last few hours from the Prime Minister. The ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars to be delayed now to 2035. Exemption of the poorest when it comes to upgrading boilers, and more time for the rest of us on all of this as well. Stephen Flynn, you wrote to Rishi Sunak about this today and said that effectively he was throwing in the towel when it came to climate change. Is he not just being pragmatic in the face of a cost of living crisis?
No, the complete opposite. And this isn't just about climate change. We, whether we like it or not, are in a global race right now when it comes to reaching net zero. Now, Scotland is an energy-rich nation, and we want to continue to be an energy-rich nation which maximises jobs and opportunities and economic growth for the people who live and work in Scotland, and particularly those folk in the northeast of Scotland who I have the privilege of representing. And what the Prime Minister has done today is he sent out a clear signal that he is not interested in net zero. So for each and every business, each and every investor looking at the United Kingdom, they will look at us and they will see a government that isn't aligned to their aspirations. And that's in stark contrast to the United States of America with their Inflation Reduction Act. That's in stark contrast to the European Union. This is backwards Britain at its worst. It is unforgivable. It's going to do lasting damage to our reputation, but most importantly, to jobs and opportunities for people right across Scotland. That is not acceptable.
Lorna Slater, what are you going to do about this? Does your target remain 2030? How much of this is reserved, or do you have to shift things in Scotland now as well?
I mean, we're still absorbing what the Prime Minister has said today, which is quite frankly terrifying. Stephen's right about it discouraging investment, but this is about the future of our planet, our obligations internationally. I remember it wasn't that long ago when we were talking about in Glasgow at COP26, and the presenter with tears in his eyes that we weren't going to be able to save those nations who would be inundated by sea level rises. Those things will affect us here too. This is going to affect our ability to grow our crops. It's going to affect our ability to, look after our economy. We need to bring in that investment.
So does Scotland have the power to ignore this and continue with the targets that we had in place?
Scotland will absolutely work to the targets that we've got. We haven't yet absorbed how the changes in Westminster might affect that because, of course, we do not have all the powers of an independent country here. It's one of the reasons why the Greens are so keen on Scottish independence is so we could have those powers here. But we are still moving ahead with policies that we know make a difference.
So hang on, how would that work? So that would mean that you could go to Newcastle and buy a petrol or diesel new car and bring it back to Scotland, but you wouldn't be able to buy one here, effectively.
Looking at exactly how these policies would interface between the countries is something that we need to do. I mean, of course, there's a general election next year, and the people of the UK will have the ability to vote on whether they think tackling the climate crisis is an urgency. Is it an emergency, or is it not?
So you definitely won't push this back to 2035. As far as you're concerned, the target is still 2030.
It has to be. This is a climate emergency. It's not a climate wait and see. After the summer we've had with wildfires, floods, record heat waves, this is just the terrifying beginning of the breakdown of our biosphere. Everything depends on having a livable planet to hand on to our children and grandchildren. We have to take action right now, and some of it is pretty straightforward. You've already seen this in Scotland. I'm sure many of you know people or are yourselves benefiting from free bus travel for everyone 21 and under, for example. That is how we tackle the climate emergency, by changing how we live, and we can do that for the better.
That's what the Scottish Government have got to say about this. Labour hope to be in Downing Street after a general election. Would you just instantly reverse this?
Well, I think we've already said that we would reverse the decision to delay till 2035. I think that's a ridiculous announcement from the Prime Minister.
And what about the rest of it, the position on boilers and the timescale around all that?
Well, actually, around the boilers, actually, that's never been our position, to the scrapping of the boilers. We believe we should be using hydrogen energy going into homes rather than conventional oil and gas. But a wider point is, I think what the announcement today demonstrates is that this is a weak Prime Minister who is led by his party rather than leading his political party, and it's an end-of-days government that is trying to find another culture war to try and piece together a vote to try and survive the next general election. And actually, I agree with Lorna and Stephen on one thing, which is this makes the general election even more important. The opportunity for change, which Scotland can't bypass, Scotland can be a key part of and lead the way in, and that is returning a UK-wide Labour government, because we will put in clean energy by 2030 as a key mission. That will mean billions of pounds of investment from a UK Treasury coming into Scotland to invest in hydrogen, onshore wind, offshore wind, carbon capture. It means that a publicly owned energy company the SNP promised us actually gets delivered in the form of GB Energy that will be headquartered here in Scotland. And our energy policy will be driven by 4 principles. And that is more jobs, lower bills, greater energy security so we're not reliant on imports from despotic regimes like Russia, and climate leadership. That's what's on the ballot come the next general election, and that change only happens if we get rid of this rotten, economically illiterate, morally bankrupt Tory party and elect a Labour government.
Well, that's down to the people in the room this evening. Let's find out how you are feeling in the light of today's announcement. Are you feeling relieved that the pressure is off on this, or more anxious? Lady down here.
I don't agree with it at all. It's just beyond me. But to address Stephen and Lorna, you both talked about Scottish Government targets that have been missed for 12 years.
8 times.
Mr Youssef, who has gone to America to give a speech about the climate crisis and everything. He got on a plane to give a speech that could have been given by video. It could video link. He's went with an entourage while he's facing possible legal action here in Scotland for missing targets of the infrastructure investment plan. Sorry, I had to remember it.
Just tell me.
He's facing legal action for missing climate targets.
What do you think about what Rishi Sunak has announced today?
I just think it's madness. We have a plan, you stick to it, but you two talked about targets from the Scottish Government. Yous are missing yours as well.
OK, thank you. Gentleman in the front row here.
I think that to kid ourselves that the emissions in Scotland or even in the UK are going to make a significant difference to climate change is a nonsense. I think what Rishi Sunak is trying to do is make it easier for people in the UK to actually commit to the Green Deal. And if all of us are getting into financial trouble when we do that, that's completely the wrong thing to do.
Were you relieved by this announcement today?
I wasn't relieved or unrelieved. I think it's the right thing to do for the people of the UK.
Okay, a gentleman over here. Yeah, on you go.
It's not a climate emergency we need a politician's emergency, especially starting from the SNP and the Greens. And I think, yeah, once again, with the gentleman to my left, I totally agree with Rishi. You have to look at the percentage of the people who are, struggling, literally, financially, day to day. Give them that extra, 5 years will definitely take a burden off.
Can I just come
Stephen Flynn first, then we'll come back to you, because the challenge is against you.
So we've been hearing here about the fact that this will make people better off. Well, the government's own advisors say that the transfer from petrol and diesel vehicles to low-emission vehicles will put money into your pocket. So by stopping petrol and diesel vehicles, you will be better off. That is the #1 point here. And just if we may just go back to... This is the government's own advisors, Craig. If you don't want to listen to experts, then you're going in hock with Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, who came before you. But in terms of what Anna said with regards to the Labour Party, it's the Labour Party who've walked away from their £28 billion Green Deal commitment. Nonsense. It's Keir Starmer who attacked Sadiq Khan over his ULEZ requirements in London. The Labour Party kicked the door open when it came to reversing policies on climate change. And all that's happened is the Tories have run through
Anna Sarwar?
I think it demonstrates that Stephen's rattled, that he'd rather attack the Labour Party than attack the Tories that are actually in government causing damage right across the country. But I think the cost of living is a really, really important point here, because we are not going to take the public with us if people think that our climate change agenda means perpetually high bills, less energy security, and indeed fewer jobs. And actually, that's the plan.
They only think that because you keep saying it. It isn't true.
That's the plan, and that's the route that the Tories have got us on, but it's also the plan and the route that the Scottish Government have got us on as well.
It's not true.
And the way we confront the cost of living crisis is by doing a proper windfall tax on the oil and gas giants who are making record profits, something Stephen opposed previously.
That's not true.
And putting money directly back into people's pockets.
That is not true.
Confront the cost of living crisis.
Don't speak untruth to the audience, Anna.
And the important point to make about congestion charges, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, it is actually a proposal that hard-working families in this constituency, who are already struggling with their energy bills, struggling with a mortgage hike of about £2,000 a year, will be asked to pay higher income tax if they're earning over £28,000. 1 in 4 households will be asked to pay an average of £740 more on their council tax every year, and you'll be charged to drive into Glasgow city centre. That's not how you take...
OK, hang on. Craig Hoy from the Scottish Conservatives, in the midst of a by-election here. This is a really high-risk announcement to make, isn't it?
Look, I think we have to look at the original question that came from the gentleman, which was, are we sleepwalking into a climate change emergency? Not if we don't act. And I think actually everybody on this panel understands that we need to act. And the main target that's been set is net zero by 2050. And the Prime Minister today redoubled our commitment to that. The issue is
slowed down the journey
precisely,
to get there.
The issue is how do we get there? And who pays for us to get there? So let's take, for example, that Lorna in Scotland has set a target that we decarbonise our homes, so we put in the insulation and the measures in the next 10 years. The price tag for that is £33 billion. Now, the question is, are you all going to be expected to pay for that, or is Lorna Slater going to step in and support you in that? Achieving net zero is going to be expensive. And I think what the Prime Minister said today is that we will stick to the 2 main milestone commitments. One is to make sure that we reduce emissions by 68% by 2030. He's left that commitment in place, and it's right that he does. And we're then going to proceed in lockstep with our partners in the EU to 2050, to an era of net zero. The question is, can we take the public with us? Well, we can't if we expect them, in the midst of a cost of living crisis, to have to fork out thousands and thousands of pounds for new boilers or to get rid of their cars. We have to be pragmatic, we have to be reasonable, and we have to set targets that you don't pay for. Why is it a cost of living crisis? The reason this is a cost of living crisis, well... Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, 15 years of Tory government. Stephen has been asleep and has missed the Ukraine war and the Russian aggression, which has led to a huge increase at the cost of our energy
Tell
bills.
people whose mortgages are going up.
This is a complex situation.
Feels.
This is a complex situation, Stephen, and I think you owe it to everybody in this room to level with them, to say, how are we going to pay for this journey to net zero? And that means we may have to take a slightly different route to it. But make no mistake, every politician, and right at the front is the Prime Minister, is there and committed to those key targets. And the big target is to proceed to 2050.
Craig, this was a big announcement today, and we have the UK's energy capital here in Scotland. Did you know it was coming? Did the Prime Minister talk to you about this?
Well, the Prime Minister didn't talk to me personally about it, but I think if you read the mood music and read the country, if you'd read the country recently, there is real concern. They came to my summer surgery tour. People turning up to say they've got an 1820s old farmhouse that leaks heat everywhere. And they were asking me the question, what is Lorna Slater going to give me to make sure that I don't have to sell my home in order to be able to make it adhere to your policies? It's not scaremongering. It's not scaremongering. I think the other thing...
You're putting the fear in people that they would be forced to sell their homes in order to insulate them, which is a nonsensical
argument. They will not be able to sell their homes. They will not be able to sell their homes.
What the Scottish Government is already doing, which the UK Government has now joined us in doing, we have grants of £7,500 for people to upgrade.
And the UK Government committed to that today.
Yes, finally caught up to us on that. And we're £9,000 if you're in a rural area.
But Lorna,
we are already putting money in people's pockets for this. But ANAS has committed people to more air pollution, to less money to put in place for
where's the £33 billion coming from?
Investing in bus travel, in better trains and public transport.
Hang on. Enough. No.
We
enough
need the
on all
congestion
this.
charging to make the investment.
The announcement was made today because of these people in the room and how they feel about this. So let's hear from them. Man in the black T-shirt there.
I think it's a diabolical decision, and the people that are going to pay for it should be the millionaires. Windfall tax that all the companies and make the millionaires and billionaires pay for it, not the people that's on less than 100 grand a year. It's the ones that's over 100 grand plus the millionaires.
OK, thank you. Gentleman with the beard up there. Yeah, on you go.
I just wanted to pick up Mr. Sarwar on the comment about the low emission zone. And I mean, there's a really easy way to avoid it if you're living in Rutherglen, and it's over there. It's called the train station.
Yeah. Don't cut trains, don't cut public transport, invest in public transport, and then impose restrictions.
Where do you get the money from, ANAS?
OK.
Through congestion charging and those kind of investment
opportunities. So you think it's OK, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, when people are struggling to pay their mortgage,
to invest in better public transport?
Home,
yes, I do.
To say, put up your income tax on £28,000. That's not... Someone on £28,000 is not well off in this country.
Right.
£28,000 mortgage...
We may get on...
congestion charge.
We may get on to tax in just a second.
World.
But let's get back to the question in hand tonight. Alex Cole-Hamilton, you've heard reactions from people in the room who say, some say this was the right thing to do, given where we are as a country at the moment in a cost of living crisis. What do you think?
Well, this is a moment in time, Stephen. In fact, historians will look back on today, potentially, if we allow it, to be the point at which we took a step down a different path, away from our commitments to net zero. Unfortunately, there is a line in the sand that has been drawn for our generation. Whether we like it or not, it falls to our generation to take tough decisions to ensure the legacy that we leave our children and theirs to come. Now, that's a difficult proposition because it means taking tough decisions, even against the backdrop of a cost of living crisis. Why? Because there's never going to be an easy time to take these essential decisions.
So people have to swallow the pain and the cost of it?
In some cases, yes. But actually, you know, we weren't talking about very difficult pain to begin with. However, the announcement that Rishi Sunak has made today is the beginning of a slippery slope. And what do I mean by that? Well, he's loosened our commitment to certain targets. That means others will follow. It means that business will have less confidence that we are a place to do business because we don't stick to the government policy that has been agreed across the platform. Yeah, Liz Truss crashed the economy today, but in his announcement this morning or this afternoon, Rishi Sunak has crashed the economy for the future because you see Jaguar Land Rover, Ford reacting in quote-unquote apoplexy. They were raging about the fact that they had made investment decisions to site factories in the British Isles based on our commitment to phase out non-abated fuel-guzzling cars by 2030. That commitment's out the window. How do you make an investment decision in the United Kingdom if you don't believe the climate commitments we are making are worth the paper they are written on? Shame on him.
Craig Holly, but isn't the point here that if we continue to set targets that are unachievable or unaffordable. We're just going to be replicating what the Scottish Government has done.
As
we said earlier, they have missed their climate change targets 8 times
let Lorna Slater answer for herself.
8 times in the last 12 years.
We're still doing better than the UK government.
But 8 times in the last 12 years.
The Climate Change Committee is clear that the Scottish Government is doing more than the UK Government is. And by Rishi Sunak
the UK is leading the G7.
Taking no action towards meeting those targets, we are now much less likely to meet them. We have to take action now.
But we're going to meet that 2050 target. That's a commitment
by doing
from the Prime
nothing,
Minister.
Craig, by doing nothing at all.
No, but what we are saying is that after the COVID pandemic, we have to look again, and if certain targets are not enforceable or not achievable, we have to
down on the target.
No, we have to be pragmatic.
Ooh.
But as I said, the 2 principal targets we're going to stick to and we're going to meet.
OK, all right. Your views on all of this from home this evening. The hashtag is BBCDN. We've got a lot to get through this evening. So let's get to the second question. It comes from Jerry Keegan. Jerry, evening.
Good evening, panel. Given the upcoming by-election here on October the 5th, what do each of the panel think is the issue affecting constituents in this area and why?
Jerry, thank you very much. Anna Sarwar, you've been knocking doors for weeks here. What are people telling you? What's the #1 issue?
I think the #1 is the cost of living, which we've been speaking about. But actually, there's probably a twin crisis with the cost of living crisis and the NHS crisis. I know people across this community are struggling to make ends meet, struggling to pay with the Tory mortgage bombshell, struggling to pay the electricity bills. That's why we've set out a clear plan about how we bring bills down, partly through a windfall tax, partly through a mortgage rescue scheme, so people don't have to lose their homes. Partly we're bringing down the cost of public transport. But actually also the NHS crisis. Over 10,000 people in this community are on an NHS waiting list. And I'm struck by the number of people, heartbreaking stories actually, of people I've spoken to directly on their doorsteps, people that aren't well off, that have been forced to go private to pay for treatment. One man I spoke to in Cambuslang waited 3 years for a hip replacement, remortgaged his house to pay £15,000 to get a hip replacement. I had a mum in tears because she waited 3 years for her child to get a mental health diagnosis, had to pay private to get a mental health diagnosis and then go back on an NHS waiting list. This is happening right now. 40% of all hip and knee replacements in Scotland right now are being done privately because of the crisis in our NHS.
And when they tell you that, what do you say you're going to do to fix it?
Well, the way we've got to fix it is we've got to get to grips with the NHS crisis. That means...
What does that mean?
So the health boards we've got 50 boards in this country for a population of 5.5 million. Why do we need 50 chief execs, 50 finance directors? We need fewer managers.
That's administration. That's not changing the waiting list.
That's part of it, because you've got waste in terms of management. Secondly, digital technology. Digital technology, not cuts. Just cuts we're seeing is what's happening under your government.
Implies you want to cut things.
No, if you want to have more managers rather than more nurses and consultants, that's up to you, Lorna. I'd prefer to have more nurses and more consultants because that's how you get people's treatment done. Secondly, digital technology. We should have much more rapid diagnosis. We should have much more remote diagnosis and then fast-track people into getting the treatment. Third, cancer care has got to be at the heart of this. Cancer remains Scotland's biggest killer. It remains Scotland's biggest killer even at the height of the COVID pandemic. So rapid diagnosis, rapid treatment, and then finally getting to grips with the workforce crisis. We've got a workforce that has been through the mill. They've had crisis after crisis. That's why we've got to back them. We've got to support them. That's partly, of course, through pay, but it's also about conditions and a proper workforce plan, so we have a pipeline of supply for people working in our NHS and social care. It has to happen urgently because lives are being lost and people, frankly, are paying the price of SNP incompetence.
Right. Stephen Flynn, you launched the SNP campaign up here. Are people telling you on the doorstep, the doors that you knock, are they telling you independence is the #1 issue for them?
So if I may, there's 2 things that are certain about this by-election. The first is that the Conservatives are going to get hammered. And the second is the fact that either the Scottish National Party or the Labour Party are going to win here. Because in every election since 2010, the SNP and the Labour Party have traded this seat. Now, when I've been out chapping doors, a bit like Annis, it's the cost of living crisis that's came up. It's energy bills. And, you know, the SNP's put forward a proposal for the £400 rebate to be reintroduced, sorry. It's mortgage payments. It's the SNP that's put forward the fact that we need to see interest rate relief for families, not just in Rutherglen, but right across Scotland. It's food bills. And it's the SNP that's been saying that we need to have a cap on supermarket staples, which impact each and every person in this room.
Keep going. Where's independence on the list?
But hold on. There is an intrinsic link between each of those things and decisions that have been made at Westminster by governments that we didn't vote for. Why is there an energy crisis? Because of failed UK energy policy. Why is there a mortgage crisis?
Nothing to do
because
with
of
the war in
failed
Ukraine.
Conservative governments. Why is there a food price hike? Because of Brexit. Each and every one of those decisions was taken at Westminster. We can overturn them by making sure that our future is in our hands, not the Conservatives.
Let's hear from the audience. Gentleman with a beard. Yes, on you go.
I've been voting since 1964. I don't look that age, but I voted Labour for many years and moved to voting SNP. Over all of these years, a procession of Tory and Labour governments have not delivered anything for Scotland. Listen to Anas giving us honeyed words there about what Labour are going to do when they get into power. What I know is they will not do anything for this country. The only thing that will work is if we have an independent Scotland where the opportunity for the people who live in this country to make decisions about themselves.
Young man in the white T-shirt. There, yeah.
So what could be described as a working class constituency? I'm not sure I see any names or parties on the ballot paper that really are going to stick up for working class people in the constituency.
Okay, sorry, and yeah, the young man in the white T-shirt in front of you. Yeah, on you go.
It was just to come back to what Stephen said. Every time you answer a question, you go back to everything's Westminster's fault. You know, it's the SNP that's in charge of Scottish education. It's the SNP that's in charge of Scottish justice. It's the SNP that's in charge of the NHS in Scotland.
I think I recognise the young man as a prominent Conservative activist, but notwithstanding that, when it comes to...
Are you a Conservative activist?
When it comes to... I'm just pointing out...
I've still got an opinion.
SNP, I wear my badge.
I've still got an opinion, and I still get to vote.
He's still got a vote.
And it's voters that keep you in your job.
And I wouldn't discredit that
keep
at
you in your
all.
job. So just answer the question.
And I will absolutely answer the question, because that's the right thing to do. When it comes to education, 95% of Scotland's young people go to positive destinations. That means they go to work, they go to apprenticeships, they go to college, or they go to university.
Why are the number of kids getting higher in this constituency dropping?
When it comes to the health service, and Anas mentioned the health service earlier, are there challenges? Yes, there are huge challenges, enormous challenges within our health service. Those problems have been exacerbated by the fact that we were taken out of the European Union. Now, Anas wants to talk about a workforce plan. One of the biggest challenges we face is the fact that we have bed blocking in our NHS. Why is there bed blocking? Because we can't get people into our social care setting.
Why can't we get people social care?
Why can't we get people into our social care system? Because there's not enough staff. Because we're not able to attract people in from the continent.
That's a workforce plan that's been wrong for years.
And of course, when it comes to the NHS, I don't need to remind anyone in this room that, of course, there's not been a single NHS strike in Scotland. In stark contrast to the
NHS is still in a mess.
In England, where there is a strike on an almost weekly, if not monthly basis. In fact, I think there's a strike going on at this moment in time. So we have a record to be proud of, and I'm very much keen.
Okay, hang on a sec. I want to hear more from the audience. Gentleman with the tie. Yeah.
You mentioned Brexit and the independence vote, etc. This is, again, undemocratic. You're blaming Westminster for these things. Westminster did not decide on Brexit. The people of the UK decided on Brexit. The people of Scotland decided to remain in the UK. And the same with Labour. They put a candidate up that wasn't elected by the CLP. Where democracy went to.
Hang on. Jerry, who asked the question? Yep, on you go.
The gentleman to my right saying that the candidate wasn't elected by the CLP, that is, I'm afraid, nonsense. There were 300 people in the hall and 4 or 5 candidates stood up in the night and everyone cast the ballot. But to come back to the point, there are 2 things. The first is the cost of living. We're coming into winter. I've got a smart meter in my kitchen sitting on the window ledge. That is going to, going to overdrive fairly soon. And the second thing is the NHS. Every week, for weeks, I got a text from a local GP surgery saying, don't come down unless death is imminent because somebody's sick or there's a doctor, somebody's ill or a doctor is unable to see you. I point the blame for that directly at the Scottish Government since 2007, who have cut back on the number of nurses that we have, doctors that we have, and support staff that we have. We have a census. You completely ignored the fact in that census that the baby boomer generation within the NHS were all going to retire at the one time.
All right, yeah, we take your point absolutely. And the blonde lady just in the middle there as well, then we'll move back to the panel.
I'd quite like to make the point that in actual fact, I think Scotland's just fed up with the whole political system in its sense. Scotland is a socialist country. For successive years after years and years and years, we've voted Labour. We've either been stuck between a Labour government or a Conservative government. We then took the option to vote in SNP because we recognised that neither under a Conservative government or under a Labour government were Scotland actually being treated in the way that they should be in terms of, one, the productivity of the country and its social values. We now have an SNP government that I vote SNP, but I also am very disheartened by a lot of their policies. Unfortunately for me, I don't have an alternative to vote for independence in Scotland. I'm always stuck with a Labour Party that is so in the past, and I really think that for the Labour Party to bring themselves into the future and recognise that Scotland is a wonderful country, a capable country, and then it will be a better place. And just to tap on the cost of living thing, we constantly hear about how you're all going to tax, cuts. When are you actually going to put a cap on what the electricity and gas companies can actually charge people? A windfall tax isn't going to cut it. It's going to invest back into different areas.
OK, there's somebody here who'd like to offer you an alternative. That's Alex Cole-Hamilton, the Liberal Democrats. When you knock the doors, what are they telling you here that is the most important topic?
Well, I'll tell you in just a second, but before I do, I want to address something that just happened here. When you sign up for a show like this and join the audience, it's a good chance you're interested in politics, and you're here to grill us as politicians. So I think it's pretty outrageous that Stephen Flynn just identified an activist from another Tory from another party.
I wear my badge.
No, it's outrageous, Alex. Because you know fine well.
I wear my badge.
You know fine well that legions of online nationalist shock troops will now troll this young man for his interest in politics. So shame on you. Shame on
Alex, come on.
They're knocking doors in Rutherglen and in other parts of the country. It is the cost of living in a heartbeat. That's what people will tell you. And on Thursday, an important government consultation closes, and that's a consultation around the SNP Green government's plans to increase council tax across the bands. That could mean as much as £750 for 1 in 4 households in Scotland, just at a time when the cost of living crisis is the worst it's been since rationing. Now, this is a government that claims to hate the council tax. In fact, in 2007, the SNP campaigned on a manifesto commitment to axe the unfair council tax. And where are we now? 16 years later, after the freeze, they're just about to give it the biggest hike in its history. The second thing I'd say is this is absolutely right that Anas is on the money on health, but it's also mental health and it's long COVID. Long COVID will become to be seen as one of the biggest mass disabling events since the First World War. 200,000 Scots now suffering, their lives shattered by this debilitating illness, and we are nowhere. They would be better off moving to England with the support that's available there. The final thing I'll say is this, is on mental health, is that with schools, we're seeing a massive influx of mental ill health among children and young people. Why? Because they've had it really hard. These 14, 15-year-olds have had the first 2 years of their high school in their bedrooms. The long shadow of lockdown is leading to mass behavioural disruption, lower educational attainment, and yet, if they put their hands up and ask for help, they join the longest queue in the NHS. If your daughter fell off her bike, broke her arm, she'd be in plaster by the end of the day. She comes to you with self-harming behaviour or with suicidal ideation. She joins that longest queue in the NHS. It is a national disgrace.
Lorna, Slater, Greens didn't stand here last time. Why this time? And for you, what's the #1 issue that you're getting on the doorsteps?
I mean, the #1 issue that we're getting on the doorsteps is the same as everyone, cost of living crisis. Unlike the Labour Party telling you what they might do, I can tell you what we are doing on that.
Not enough.
Free bus travel.
Not enough.
Free bus travel for everyone 21 and under, an increase to the Scottish child payment. We've lifted 90,000 children out of poverty in Scotland. We are working to make sure that more people have more money in their pockets. We're doing everything we can to ensure a living wage and fair wages.
That's not the case.
Now, every single day in my in my work as a government minister, I say, what can we do to improve fair wages? What can we do to tackle the climate crisis? And over again, I am told it's not devolved. We can't impose a living wage in Scotland. That's not a devolved power. Over and over, we haven't got the powers to do those things. The tools we need to tackle the cost of living crisis would come with independence. But in the meantime, we are stretching every sinew to make
Lorna,
sure
why
not
do you
only...
support 1 in 4 households having their council tax
not
increased?
only are we making sure...
Hang on, let her finish your point.
...that public sector workers in Scotland get the best possible pay deals that we can.
You take it back
we
off
are
on the
across the board making sure that we have the money to invest. And yes, Labour may have discovered the magic money tree, but in order to invest in things that really matter, for example, bus travel, for example, we need to be able to increase revenue to do that. And what you asked me the question at the start, Stephen, about why we're standing now. We're in a climate emergency. After the summer we've had of wildfires and floods, when we see ahead of us the terrifying future of a global collapse in our biosphere,
we have discussed
the Greens have to stand.
Craig Hoyt, Stephen Flynn says you're going to get hammered in this by-election. If you don't have skin in the game, who should your voters support instead?
Well, look, we've got a fantastic candidate, and somebody asked there about who represents the working classes in this seat. And Thomas Kerr, I don't know if people have gone and looked at his backstory. Thomas grew up in the high flats, in Glasgow. Both his parents had addiction issues. His father died of a drugs-related condition. And Thomas came out as a Conservative and said this in the paper just the other week. He said that when he was living that life, even when he was 6 or 7, he said he wasn't the one who was cared for. He was the carer in his household. And he said as he grew up, he said, Labour and the SNP left him behind. He said they only came round to chap his door when they wanted his vote. And he said he came out as a Scottish Conservative because he wanted opportunity and choice for his community. And I've been out chapping on doors here in Rutherglen with Thomas. And I tell you what people say. They say, why, if my neighbour gets burgled, do the police not come and investigate anymore? Why do I maybe have to go to my son or my daughter and have the ignominy of saying, can I borrow £15,000 to pay for a hip operation because the SNP have mismanaged the health service? They're saying, why are our roads in such a terrible condition? Or a nurse in this constituency who says, why did I have to get rid of my car and buy a new car at a time when I've got a huge pressure on my family finances. Otherwise, I can't drive to my night shift because of the low emission zone. These are the failures of the SNP government, and that's why people in this constituency will look at a candidate like Thomas Kerr and realise that he's on their side, and he's on the side of this community.
Well, let's hear from the actual voters, from their own mouths, what's most important to them. Lady in the hat, there.
Thank you. So I was lucky enough to be brought up by 2 parents who worked really hard to help me get where I am now. I've got a great job and I have private healthcare, and I'm aware how privileged I am. I have a family member who's in hospital who's been there for 7 weeks who can't get out because there's no one at the other side to look after her. She can't get the operation that she needs. And it breaks my heart to see that when I realise how lucky I am and how thankful I am. And it's breaking my heart to see these people bed blocking and there's other people desperate to get in. It's horrific, and these people need help.
Thank you. Your man here, yeah.
Yeah, what I'm finding in the local area is that with the South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture taking over with all leisure facilities, we are seeing facilities closed down or sold off to private companies. And this is going to lead to a physical health crisis and a mental health crisis as our children don't have anywhere to go for an outlet. I run a basketball club that caters for close to 60 children under the ages of 18. And we're finding it harder and harder to get lets or halls booked. And we're just finding out over the course of the last year that lets will double in price. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, there are parents that can't afford that. And we don't know what we can do to keep clubs running, to keep children off of the streets and healthy.
Come on, more of these, more of the priorities for you. Man in the white shirt, there, yeah.
I know we spoke a lot about education earlier on as well, but and I think it was Stephen Flynn that says about the fact that there's no strikes with the NHS, but there's the important strikes next week as well. And it just shows you with the way that the education's going just now in Scotland, it's really the teachers and the people who work in the education sectors are really, really struggling. I work in early years, and in early years, the Scottish Government recently, they've up the 3 hours for children, but there's no real support with the nurseries and with the people who are working. Like, we're still working on the same conditions that we were before those hours were up. So we're taking in more children, but no additional resources. It's things like this that are making it more difficult for education places in Scotland.
Thank you. Lots of challenges for all the candidates here, and you can find a full list of the candidates for the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election on the BBC Scotland News website. Let's move on to our next question of the night. Keep the conversation going on social media. Hashtag is BBCDN. Our third question tonight comes from Hamish Adamson. Hamish, where are you? Evening.
Evening. Following the introduction of 20 miles per hour speed limits for vehicles in Wales, should the Scottish Government implement a new default speed limit rather than its current policy of a more gradual rollout?
Lorna Slater.
I mean, that's been a Scottish Green policy for a very long time. My colleague Mark Ruskell was campaigning for a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit throughout Scotland for many years. I'm glad that we're able to start rolling this out in Scotland. It's absolutely important for safety, for pollution, and for the wider climate emissions.
500,000 people in Wales have signed a petition against it. How are you going to take the people of Scotland with you on this?
I mean, we're already doing this in Scotland. As the audience member points out, Wales have decided to do this in a sudden way. We're doing it in a more phased way. Hopefully that will allow people to come with us. I certainly know how much safer I feel walking around in the streets when cars are going much more slowly. They're able to look around them more carefully. And that safety, as well as the air pollution, I think is really important.
Craig Hoy?
Look, I think I've spoken to many communities in East Lothian and the Scottish borders who are very grateful the fact that their village or their town now has a 20-mile-an-hour limit. I think what we need to recognise here is the importance of local democracy, and rather than it being Lorna or myself that make those decisions, I think the councils have a duty to consult local communities and then to find out from them what kind of speed limits do they want. And not every town or every village necessarily needs a 20 limit on every single road.
Isn't that just confusing? I mean, do you not need a national policy so everybody understands, as they've done in Wales, what the limits are?
But I think if we go down the route of actually asking residents and having local democracy, we empower local people and we'll raise awareness of those speed limits. But I think fundamentally, I mean, Lorna has talked about creating 15 or 20-minute neighbourhoods and talked about the importance of taking these sorts of measures. I think we've got to also recognise the distinction between what happens in our towns and our rural communities as well in terms of roads policy and transport policy more generally. I think if we do that, then we can reflect the fact that, yes, there are big changes taking place in relation to transport movements in towns, but I don't think we can forget our rural communities in this process as well.
Would people welcome it here in Rutherglen? Let's find out. Man in the front row.
I was actually going to ask a slightly different question, because we've been speaking about the cost of living crisis so many times tonight, and yet our Parliament has been spending time on what's not the most important question. How democratic is it that a small party with only 7 MSPs out of 129 MSPs in Parliament is able and permitted to divert our parliamentary time to discuss and waste time on policies that are not in the SNP manifesto and not supported by most of the people in Scotland?
Well, they're holding Stephen to that. They're holding Stephen to that.
Just on that point, Lawrence, I mean, it's been estimated it's going to cost in Wales, I think, 4.5 billion over 30 years, this speed limit. How do you respond to that?
To respond to the audience member, I'm so proud of what we're doing in the Scottish Government. It's something that we don't see anywhere else in the UK.
Deposit return scheme, GRR?
That was on your manifesto, Craig, the deposit return scheme. We were just delivering what the Scottish Parliament asked for.
And so badly mismanaged by Lorna Slater that fewer than 20% of producers signed up to a scheme.
Craig, that's
so badly mismanaged.
Inaccurate.
So badly mismanaged by Lorna
totally
Slater
not the question
that would have
the
pushed our
member.
drinks industry to breaking point.
That's not true, Craig. It would have been up and running a month ago, and it would have been great.
Well,
it was shut down by the UK government, who are short-sighted on environmental issues and don't give a crap about litter on your street.
Hang on a second. You still haven't answered this man's point here. Is the tail wagging the dog here?
The tail's wagging the dog.
We're working together in the Scottish Government. It's a cooperation agreement. So 2 political parties who have different views on many issues have agreed to work together to roll up our sleeves to tackle child poverty, to tackle the climate crisis. And I think this is actually what voters want to see. Rather than the shouting and attacking across the room, to see us working together on things that really, really matter. And that does include things like Scottish independence, because we want to set out a vision for a better future.
It's good to be back on debate night. Just hang on a second. Back to the question, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, Anna Sarwar. Are you happy with them?
Look, to be honest, I think it's one of the good things about devolution, where different parts of the country can try things and you can learn, you can see the evidence and you can see whether it makes sense to replicate. We led the way, for example, in Scotland with the smoking ban, and that was then replicated in England and Wales.
Do we need to speed up the slowdown in Scotland is the question?
I think the 20s, plenties work really well around our schools. I think you have to look at the evidence. So I would be pointed towards the evidence, to be honest, rather than taking a purely ideological view on that. Just go back to the other question about the tail wagging the dog. Nobody voted. It wasn't in the SNP manifesto to put income tax up for people earning over £28,000. It wasn't in the SNP manifesto to put council tax up for 1 in 4 households by £740 a year in the middle of a cost of living crisis. It wasn't in the SNP manifesto to waste £188 million on the deposit return scheme when the new tax rises will raise less than £100 million. It is not on people in this community and across this country to have to foot the bill and pay higher income tax, higher council tax, to foot the bill of SNP incompetence and failure. It's not the case. And to put it on top of a Tory mortgage bombshell. So I take the point Craig makes about the local candidate. I don't just hope that the Tories get thumped in this by-election. I can't wait for them to get thumped in the next general election, because we need to get rid of the whole rotten lot of them and get change in this community and right across our country.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
So I'm a Liberal. I believe in localism. I believe that the decisions around road safety should be devolved and exercised where they work closer to the people they serve. I live in Edinburgh. I represent an Edinburgh constituency. We've had 20-mile-an-hour speed limits for many years now, and it works, and it's road safety. But what I get frustrated about is the culture war that develops around this. This becomes an assault on motorists or an assault on drivers. And it's linked, I think, in large part to the question we had at the start of the question about the programme about climate change. And the fact that Rishi Sunak is very much like that, the emperor in that fairy tale who sees this crowd of people dashing in one direction, says, where are my people going? I must lead them there. And that he is following public opinion, following a few hundred votes that saved the Tories' bacon in Uxbridge. And he's starting to think in that desperate way. The captain of the Titanic may have felt something similar, scrabbling around for a means of stopping the ship sinking, that this might be it. Well, I'm sorry, but this is a culture war of his creation, and it's important, especially on things like climate change and sometimes around road safety, for politicians to lead public opinion rather than just to follow it, to persuade people through our democratic debate and at forums like this of the importance and the benefits of sometimes quite unpalatable politics. So to come back in a roundabout way to the very start of this question, yeah, I mean, this is about local government, about what works best for your community, and it shouldn't be about the culture wars of the Conservative Party.
Let's hear from our audience on this. Man with the beard.
Like the whole time during this show, you guys have used, basically every time you speak, they'll use it as an opportunity to like inter-party bashing the whole time. And none of you have the humility to just admit sometimes you don't have all the answers. Practically every single time somebody asks you a question, after about 2 sentences, you're already blaming someone else across the panel, like half the time. It's kind of boring.
Stephen Flynn?
When it comes to 20-mile-an-hour zones, I'll probably fall into the space of not necessarily having the strongest opinion in the world on this. Just to tie in with the previous question there. Look, I think it's based upon proportionality, and it should be based upon what communities want. There's some areas where it makes sense to have it outside of schools and hospitals. Does it make sense in some village communities? Yes, of course it does. Does it make sense everywhere? Probably not. But there needs to be an element of proportionality based upon evidence. And I think that's probably a pretty sensible position for us to get to.
Okay, but to follow up on the
just
issue,
very briefly,
the issue that Anna's raised in relation to tax, Lorna said that there's a cost of living crisis and want to relieve pressure on communities. Do you know what percentage of taxpayers in this constituency are now paying more tax than they would in the rest of the UK?
So were you questioning me there?
Yeah.
Well, what I do know is that the majority of Scots pay less tax than they do in the UK.
Well, in this constituency, 50%, half of this audience...
Was that not the answer you were expecting?
Half of this audience... Was that not the answer you were expecting? Half of this audience, Stephen, are paying more tax in this constituency than they would in the rest of the UK. And 50%.
And what you
People earning over 27,000, that's teachers, That's policemen. That's
But
classroom
people
assistants.
earning less than that pay less. That's progressive taxation. That is helping to make
taxing-
Scotland a fairer
taxing
place.
teachers.
I want to squeeze in one final question about where our taxes go this evening. The hashtag is BBCDN to get involved in this lively conversation tonight. Final question is from Anne Stewart. Anne, where are you? Evening.
Good evening, panel. What are the government proposing to do to support councils in the prevention of services cuts? Because this is affecting elderly right across the whole spectrum. They actually can't go to any clubs now because they're closing down. They're stuck in at home. They've got mental health issues and they've nowhere to go during the day to get a hot meal.
And thank you for your question. South Lanarkshire Council, they've said it's the most difficult budget they've ever had to set. Government Minister Lorna Slater, what do you say to that?
It is. I can absolutely sympathise.
Sorry.
It is the most difficult budget we've ever had to
Millions
set
being
to.
cut here.
It's your budget.
The Scottish Government budget is set by the UK, and we have limited revenue-raising powers. We do. That's the fact of the matter. We have limited revenue-raising powers in the UK, and you can hear when we try to use revenue-raising powers that people freak out about it. We have limited revenue-raising powers. This is the toughest budget for us as well, and I know that it is a struggle across the country. We try and make sure every pound is spent as best we can, and that meant making the best possible settlement we could for public workers to make sure they have that money in their pocket.
So why not raise tax further to give you the extra income that you need? Because you've got the powers to do that.
We only have the very limited powers over income tax rises. Local councils actually have more powers to revenue raise and more powers on using their reserves and of borrowing than we do. So working with councils, we want to make sure they have more powers, more powers to revenue raise. But there is an absolute limit to what the Scottish Government is able to do. And I wish we could do more.
Council's under huge pressure. We'll find out tomorrow whether we've got school strikes next week. Anna Sarwar.
So this particular council's had £370 million cut out of its budget by the Scottish Government. And I think it's wrong to say, of course there's a block grant, but 40% of the spending that happens in the Scottish Government is set by taxes raised or a growth or lack of growth in Scotland. So actually growing the economy is really, really important here. But actually part of the challenge we've had is, even when the budget has gone down or gone up, particularly the time when the budget was going down during the austerity years, it was a 3% cut to Scotland's budget. The SNP took that 3% cut, multiplied it by 4, and imposed that on local councils, a 12% cut on local authorities to hand over the cuts and the difficult decisions to local councils. And that's why we should put into law that whatever the budget goes up by for the Scottish Government, excluding, of course, NHS consequentials and social care consequentials, should be passed on to local authorities. So local services, local libraries, local community centres, local charities, local parks, local facilities aren't cut because of SNP's bad decision-making. So that's one thing we should do straight away. The second thing that we want to do, I talked earlier on about the investments we want to make in the Green Revolution. I want local communities to have a stake, a share, a stake, so they can make profits and money out of that technology and innovation. So not just the big companies make money, but local communities can make money out of those innovations so they can put that money back into local communities. And the perfect example of that is actually a community wind farm I saw in the Western Isles, where they're raising £2 million from this community wind farm, and they're using that money to pay for social care.
All right, I want to get around the rest of the panel. Craig Hoy.
Well, look, Lorna asked the question as to how could we make sure we don't have these terrible cuts in our communities to lunch clubs, to after-school clubs, to swimming pools. Well, for a start, I mean, you could cancel the plan for a National Care Service, which is a £1.5 billion bureaucracy.
Just say, Lorna.
Just how far would that £1.5 billion go? The £300 million wasted on ferries. An independence minister with a team of civil service publishing party political propaganda. That's the reason that we're seeing these cuts to frontline services. And that's why they've squeezed council budgets year after year after year. And not content with having cut council budgets to the core and siphoned off all that money, they're now proposing in this constituency to raise some people's council tax by up to £700 a year. It's disgusting, Lorna, and those cuts are owned by the SNP.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
That's rich.
Well, Lorna's talking about choices and about the difficulties that local government are facing. And her coalition with the SNP has only lasted 2 years. But actually, there's been a quiet arrangement between the Green Party and the SNP for many years. And in large part, the Greens have acted as midwife to the quiet death of local government in Scotland. Why? Because year on year we have heard from indicated exactly right where those cuts have fallen. And what does that mean in real terms? Well, we are seeing the diminution of social care to the point where we have the bed blocking that Lorna says that this vast and unnecessary bureaucracy is somehow designed to solve. Well, I'm sorry, that's not right. That what we're talking about setting up is a ministerial power grab that will asset strip local authorities of their ability to deliver social care in their communities. I'm sorry, but I think somebody in a Boyne or in Hamilton or in Rutherglen knows far better about the delivery of social care services in their communities than some faceless bureaucrat in Edinburgh. And my goodness, we need that system to work because we're not paying people enough in social care. It's not a professional choice.
All right.
And let me finish with
just briefly.
As a result, it causes an interruption in flow throughout the entirety of our NHS, which sees A&Es backing up and ambulances unable to discharge their patients. This is all on you, Lorna.
Stephen, hang on a minute. Stephen Flynn.
To deal with it.
Thanks, Stephen. Look, we know that the Scottish Government's budget has been cut. And we know that the Scottish Government's having to deal with all the inflationary pressures that we're all having to deal with as well. Just in the exact same way that we all know that local authorities are having to deal with those inflationary pressures.
But you choose how you spend your money.
And this is the important point. All government has to determine how they allocate resource. Now, what I've heard from the panellists around me this evening is they all want to see more money going in, but none of them have outlined what that would mean for the police service, what that would mean for the transport budget, what that would mean for all the other services that the Scottish Government provide, including the Scottish Child Payment. Nobody's outlined what they would cut in order to reverse some of the
decisions. There's a shopping list.
Hang on a second.
And let me just finish, because I used to sit on a local authority, and I also seen a local authority, which at the time was a coalition, believe me or not, a coalition between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, which had a capital budget in excess of £1 billion. So let's not forget that local authorities have the ability to make decisions for themselves as well when it comes to spending, but also who they choose to work with.
You ring-fence so much of their budgets.
OK, we've got time for one last voice from the audience, and it's going to be that lady in the blue down there. On you go.
Just to give you a personal example of this very week, the NHS in Scotland, my mum, who's 86 and has been having some heart palpitations every morning, had tried to get through to her GP and was immediately cut off and told there's no appointments left, sorry. She mentioned she had stents in her heart and she was told, sorry, no appointments. She then phoned back a few days later and again was told, sorry, no appointments. I told her, Mum, mention you've had a heart attack a few weeks ago and then you'll get their attention. She did. A doctor will phone you. She then went to A&E today, was referred to go and get an ECG and sat for 6.5 hours waiting to see a doctor. She got an ECG, sat for longer to then get the results. I had to go down, take a blanket to her and take some sandwiches and some juice because she was feeling lightheaded and faint, sitting in the waiting room. Who do you hold
responsible for that?
This is SNP NHS.
OK. Is she OK?
Well, I've not heard from her, but as far as I know, she'll be home now. But she still was at hospital when I came here.
But it's a terrible
story. Fingers crossed. I'm sorry that she's been through that.
Yeah,
Thank you for
terrible.
sharing it with us this evening.
This is our elderly. This is how we're treating them.
Well, that's the backdrop to this by-election here in Rutherglen. That's it for us for this evening from here. We're going to be next week in Kelso. You can apply to be part of the audience by going to our website. Week after that, we're going to be in Perth. If you missed any of tonight's show, we're repeated a bit later on BBC One Scotland, or you can catch us anytime on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here this evening, to our brilliant, lively audience here in Rutherglen. Remember, you can find a full list of the candidates for the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election on the BBC Scotland News website. Their polling date, 5th of October. We'll bring you the results from the count as they come in across BBC Scotland. Full analysis as well of the result the next day. And of course, thanks to you at home for watching along with our audience here. We'll see you next week from Kelso in the Borders. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well from all of us in Debate Night. Good night.